Wow, wow, wow. What a wonderful room full of wonderful people. Can we give it up one more time for Bernardine, please? Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. I am very excited to be sitting here interviewing such a phenomenal woman who I look up to and who has influenced a lot of what I do through her activism, her work as an author, and all the wonderful things that you've heard before from Lucy. So I want to start off this conversation by taking it back, really understanding the beginnings, because as we can see in this room, you were once a student sitting in this chair, walking in these hallways, and now here you are coming back to inspire us all. So I guess the question I really want to ask is, how do you feel about the start? How do you feel about the beginning of your journey, and what do you take back from that time?
Yeah, so thank you, Vee. Hi, everybody. It's really lovely to be talking to you here at Eltham Hill, because I spent 7 years of my life here, as I know probably many of you did. I was here from 1970 to 1977. So it was a very long time ago, and it was a girls' grammar school, and the building was sort of, you can't really see much of the old building, but all of this new sort of architecture has been built around the school, and we only had 500 girls at the school, and so it was very small, and I really enjoyed my time at the youth, my time here. So I grew up in Woolwich, well, I usually say Woolwich, South East London, but you all know where Woolwich is, I guess. And in the 60s and 70s, and it was a very white area. I came from an interracial family, Nigerian father, English mother, and I come from a family of 8 children. So my parents had 8 children in 10 years, and I was raised a Catholic. I went to local schools in Woolwich, and then I came here in 1970. And for most of my time, I was the only black girl here. And in fact, there is a picture of the school in 1974, and you can see, actually, that I was the only black girl here. But I really enjoyed school. I think I probably enjoyed it as much for the socializing as for the education. Yeah, I got involved in the youth theatre when I was 12, and Greenwich Young People's Theatre, which is now called Tramshed, and that was my introduction to the arts. And then I got involved in the drama group here at Eltham Hill School, which was introduced when I was in the what we call the fourth year, when I was about 14. And I was really an active member of the school drama group, and I absolutely loved it. And from about the age of 14, I decided that I was going to be an actor. So I was always somebody who knew what I wanted to do, even though I then eventually became a writer. And I was very, very focused on being an actor. And I feel very kind of lucky in a sense that I found my vocation at a young age, because I know that a lot of people might go through their whole lives not really knowing what they want to do. But I had parents who really didn't interfere with any ambitions that I had for myself. So, you know, I know obviously you're all school children, school age, young people, and, you know, there are all kind of influences on your life which are telling you, or who are telling you, what you should be doing with your life. And my parents didn't do that. And so when I decided I wanted to be an actor, my mother said to me, well, you better learn to type in case it doesn't work out. And I was absolutely appalled that she would think that it wouldn't work out, because I was so sure, in a sense, that this was what I was going to do. I was going to make it work. And I did. And I went to drama school. So after I left Eltham Hill, I then went to Rose Bruford College of Theatre and Performance, which isn't too far away. But it was then called Rose Bruford College of Speech and Drama. And it was in a park in Sidcup. And I spent 3 years studying community theatre arts there. and eventually left and formed Theatre of Black Women, which was Britain's first black women's theatre company. And the reason we formed that company was because there was no work for us in the early 80s in this country. You know, it was really hard to get work as a black actor. And so we formed our own theatre company. And in fact, the three of us did, three of the black women on my course, Paulette Randall and Patricia St. Hilaire. Paulette Randall is still in theatre. She works in film. She now do you know Silent Witness? Maybe watch it. Yeah, she's now directing for Silent Witness, which is fantastic. So like 40 years later, she's directing some of the flagship programs for the BBC. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, a bit of my origin story. And yeah, and certainly Eltham Hill was part of that. You know, it was part of the making of me. The education I got was a very good education. I didn't always use it as I should have done, but it was a very strong foundation for the career that followed.
Wow, wow. Just phenomenal. I think what I took away from what you've just said is the art of the fact that you never gave up. And I guess that is obviously central to this book that you've just written, Manifesto. And the question that I think I have, and I'm sure many of you guys have, is how did you find that source of strength within yourself to not give up? And also, why did you choose now to write about it in your latest, your 9th book? I mean, that's amazing. So why now, and why the manifesto of never giving up?
Yeah, so the book is a kind of memoir, and well, it is a memoir, but it's about how I reached this point in my career. So the Booker Prize is the biggest prize for the novel in the world, and I had set my sights on it about 23 years ago, right? And it finally came to fruition. But what I committed to was a creative life from the age of 14 through theatre. I don't know what I would have become if I hadn't have been introduced to theatre, because at the youth theatre I loved it so much. I loved the community. I loved performing. I loved being very welcomed in that space. And it was, I suppose you'd say, your happy place. It was kind of like my happy place. And so from then onwards, I was following my vocation. If you follow your vocation, if you find the thing that you love doing, then that will keep you going. But then you have to also marshal so many other things in order to keep going sometimes, if you choose a career in the arts. Because people will often say, oh, you've got to go to university and then get a job that pays a particular kind of salary and gives you job security. And that's right, there's nothing wrong with that, but that was not my story. I didn't really get job security. I'm a professor of creative writing at Brunel University London, and I got that job in 2011. And until then, I had led a completely freelance life, right? In the sense that I never had a proper job. I was always getting my income from different things to do with being a writer, whether it was touring or writing reviews or judging prizes, occasionally grants and so on. But the whole idea of never giving up, I track back to my family heritage, actually. And in Manifesto, I go back to some of my heritage, which is, it's Brazilian, it's Nigerian, it's Irish, it's German. There's also Scottish and Norwegian, but I don't know who those people were. So according to my DNA, I've got Scottish and Norwegian, but I don't know who they were. But the rest were definitely, people I know of from my background. And they're people who travel from one place to another, from one country to another in search of a better life, or because maybe they were exiled. And when I think back to that heritage, I think back to what was passed on by them to me, even though I didn't know most of them. I knew my dad, right? He'd come from Nigeria to Britain in 1949. But I didn't know the German great-great-grandfather. I didn't know my Irish great-grandmother. But they would have passed on qualities that I think helped make me the person that I was, that I am today, and the person that I became, even though I don't know what they were. But I think anybody who's migrating, and clearly a lot of the students here have migration in their family history. Anybody who's migrating has to develop such inner strength and tenacity and resilience, yes, and also determination, really, just such determination to make a new life in another country. So I think my unstoppability starts with that, with the people I never knew who go back in this country 320 years, right? So I can track my family history on my mother's side, my white English mother's side, 320 years in this country. And then a childhood with an immigrant father who married a white woman in the 1950s and everybody was against it. Not his friends, but her side of the family were against it. But they stuck together for 33 years. They were married for 33 years. So this was an example of people who loved each other and were going to get married in spite of what anybody said. And members of my mother's family cut my mother off, forever, because they disapproved of her marrying a black man. That was the culture that I grew up in, essentially. And then from that, I went into drama school, but I didn't get into a top drama school at the beginning. So I applied to drama school over 3 seasons, and those seasons would come around every, 7 months or something. And then eventually I got into 4 drama schools, and then I chose Rose Bruford College. But I know people who gave up as soon as they got their first rejection, right? So this is something I think very useful for you to take away from this, that if you don't get what you want the first time, you just keep trying. And I tried over, all these seasons to get into a place where I really wanted to go. And I've been doing that ever since. And I do talk about that in Manifesto. How if things don't present themselves to you initially, if it's not easy initially, people give up. So I know, for example, Vee, you went to Oxford, right? Which is fantastic, congratulations, because it's hard to get into Oxford. But I've taught students who tried to get into Oxford and didn't get in and thought, okay, I'm going to go to my second choice. And I said, well, try again. They're like, oh, but I failed, I haven't got in. I said, well, you really want to go to Oxford, and that's been your dream ever since you were a young child, so apply again the next year. And they have done, and they got in. Right? Because I know from my experience, that's what I did. I know from my parents' experience, that's what they did. They didn't give up. And so, like getting published, my first book, I sent it to 20 publishers, and they all rejected. And then I sent it to some more, and I got 1 acceptance. So, for some of us, getting published has been a bit of a journey, and it wasn't easy. And there are so many other examples of where I didn't give up, or even just being a published writer but not getting the attention that I felt I wanted. And then just continuing until I did get the attention I wanted, which happened 2 years ago after I'd been in the arts for 40 years, and with my 8th book at that time. And so unstoppability is something that you develop over the course of your life. And I think if you haven't got people in your life to tell you that if you don't get what you want, you still continue with it, and you've developed self-confidence and self-belief, self-motivation, self-discipline, obviously hard work, that you might then achieve what you want, then it's very easy to say, well, I didn't get into my university of choice, so I'm going somewhere else. Whereas actually you can take a year out, get more work experience and so on, and then reapply. So unstoppability felt really appropriate for me to write about once I won the Booker, because I'd reached a point which was a breakthrough point for me, and I reflected back on my life, and I realized I had been unstoppable from a very, very young age. But it's something you can cultivate.
Wow, I'm just here trying to take mental notes. And I think what I would take away from what you've just said there is that rejection is redirection, and failure is another chance to try again. So I think I would always focus on that, like what you've just said, never giving up on your dreams and going tunnel vision for them. You have to be your biggest cheerleader and keep fighting for what you want. And I think that leads me very nicely on to my next question. You've always done things that haven't been conventional. You've been taking risks. You've dedicated your life to creativity and to fighting for that. And I have an extract here from the book that I'd love to read, Manifesto. It just came out. And it says, but after 4 years working in an office, devising and managing literature projects, the dilemma facing me was whether I was going to continue to support myself through part-time admin jobs and have a half-baked writing career, or whether I was going to be unstoppable in becoming a full-time writer. I decided it was time to leave, and with no savings or financial safety, I handed in 6 months' notice. It was a risky move, but I knew I had to do it. Now, how does someone make a decision like that? No financial safety, not knowing what's coming next. How do you do that, and where did that come from?
Interesting. It's so interesting hearing you read from the book, you know, because the book's just been published, and so hearing my words coming back at me makes me look at them again, quite with kind of fresh eyes. Yeah, but you see, the thing is, that was easier for me because I'd never had a traditional job. So I had these part-time admin jobs, and I would literally sometimes work 2 days a week and have like £10 to last the weekend, literally. This was in the 90s, from like, you know, I don't know, Thursday to Tuesday when I got paid again. So I literally lived very, very cheaply. So I made a decision to live very cheaply anyway, because I had to, because the only way I could lead a creative life was to live cheaply. This is not to say that you can't have a creative life and be very rich. You know, we see many people who have creative lives and they're very rich or just financially successful. But so I don't want to put anybody off thinking that a creative life means that you're going to live in poverty. But in my situation, the choices I made meant that I was writing these radical, experimental, African diasporic books, and I was getting published, but I wasn't reaching a big audience. I wasn't making much money, so I had to get my money from all over the place. And also, when I was working in theatre, that wasn't a full-time, well, it was a full-time job, but you weren't paid full-time for it. So I was used to always living a very precarious life, and starting the beginning of the year, not knowing where the money was going to come from during the course of the year, not knowing whether I was going to be able to pay my rent. So at the point at which I said, "Leap and angels will appear," which is not my quote, it's someone else's, I was already kind of primed for that. But I also knew that if I didn't, I was so desperate. I thought, at that stage, I'd written 2 books, published 2 books. I was working on a 3rd, and I just thought, if I don't try this, then I'm always going to be somebody who's doing jobs to support other people rather than having the bigger career that I want for myself.
And I think that's a really, really beautiful thing that you're saying about wanting to pursue the career that's right for yourself. And I think a lot of us can always sit here and wonder, even if you know the right thing for you, how do you find that courage to kind of not give in to peer pressure? And I have another extract from the book. We're going to read a few extracts from the book. It's brilliant. I've read it myself, and I think it's phenomenal. And about the nature of you going against those norms and not giving into peer pressure, part of your book says, "By my early 40s, at the social gatherings of my peers, I noticed that I was often the only person in the room who was not a homeowner, even though I was the published author in their midst, yet, nonetheless, failing at all of society's rites of passage that they had all fulfilled: long-term partner, children, proper salary, homeowner, pension, in various sequences of priority." Now, that, at that time, was what the right thing to do was. How did you decide, actually, this doesn't feel good for me, and even though the societal pressures and expectations want me to be doing this, I'm following my own path? How does someone do that? Where does that courage come from?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to my parents, actually, because my mother was committed to being unconventional. You know, just by marrying a black man when she did, that was an unconventional thing to do. She was supposed to marry somebody coming from a working class background. She was a teacher, school teacher. She was supposed to marry somebody who was like a white well, it wasn't even discussed what color the person would be, because it was assumed it would be white. A white professional person, like a doctor or a lawyer or somebody, and that she would elevate the family in that way, because that was the history of the family, that each generation kind of, moves up a notch in terms of the class system. So she was unconventional. My father didn't care what other people thought anyway. So that was kind of rooted in me. But then there was this streak of bloody-mindedness in me, whereby I just, wanted to do what I wanted to do, irrespective of what everybody else was doing. But actually, when that quote that you just read from, there was a point where I remember looking around a room and thinking, but they've got all these things. And I am doing what I want to do, but I haven't got all these things. And I felt it. I did feel it. And they didn't make me feel it. I felt it. It was something that I generated inside myself, that I had, whereas they had spent 20 years building their relationships, their partners, the children, their careers, and so on. I had spent 20 years just being committed to my creativity. And I felt that I somehow, I was behind. That I was behind with society's expectations, because we are conditioned by society to achieve and have certain things at certain stages in our lives, right? And whatever, I don't know what they might be for you now, but even me saying about having a vocation may be pressure for some people, because they may not know what they want to do. But there is this expectation that you go through these rites of passage, and at a certain age you will be with your life partner, and then you will have your whatever children, and at a certain age you will have your home. I didn't buy my own home until I was 55, right? So that was 30 years after some of my peers had bought their homes. So I was doing everything in a way that was not expected of me, to be honest. But I've caught up now, actually. I've superseded all of that. But it took a long time. So again, like it's the past, it's my own character, which comes from, my inheritance in the past. And it's also about making active decisions about how I want to live my life. So I consider myself to be a straight woman, but in my 20s, I had lesbian relationships. And so that took me away from a very orthodox society anyway, because especially in the 1980s, the conversations around gender and sexuality were not the conversations we're having today. This is long before social media. This is long before out people were on television, other than kind of like comic caricatures, gay men who essentially comic caricatures. So this was at a time when gay people were vilified in the 1980s. Gay men in particular, because it was also the advent of AIDS. But lesbians, we were like the scourge of society. So I was already leading this life that was about me doing what I wanted to do, and not thinking I had to fit myself into the boxes that society sometimes wants to put us into.
And mentioning the boxes that society sometimes wants to put us into, let's discuss racism and prejudice. And I think it is a question that a lot of us have, about how you take up space in spaces that you feel like you don't belong. And I definitely was nervous the night before I was moving into Oxford, because I was like, I don't think anyone there will look like me or sound like me. I don't have enough money, and I'm a black girl coming from a single parent household. How am I going to fit in here? And I was so scared. And even when I went on to go to Harvard as well, I was nervous about the same thing, because you worry about how will my race play into what I'm about to do. And I'm curious about your journey in this world of being an author, doing all of these phenomenal things you've done, and you were the only black girl in your year here, right? Black woman, black person, in fact, in your year when you were here. And
School.
School, oh, wow. And I'm sure there are many spaces you've entered where you might be the only one. And how do you navigate that? How do you deal with that? And I also have one more quote here that we're going to read, because I think it's so powerful. And you said in your book, Manifesto, as someone who was female, working class, and a person of color, Limitations had been determined for me before I even opened my mouth, to cry at the shock of being thrust out of my mother's cozy amniotic womb, where I had spent time, 9 months, in dreamily sensate harmony with my creator. My future was no Pretorius. I was destined to be regarded as a subperson, submissive, inferior, marginal, negligible, a bona fide subaltern. The concept of Black British was considered a contradiction in terms during my childhood. So you said you being born from a white mom, a Black dad, you were already, society's like, whoa,
Yeah.
what is going on here?
Yeah.
How was that?
You know, I think how we have changed a lot in the decades, a hell of a lot. But there's still a bit of that. You know, the expectations that are imposed on us when we come from certain cultural backgrounds, and the fight to have the opportunities that are more easily available to those who do not come from those cultural backgrounds, actually, even if being a female, right? Even, you know, feminism is one of the most important, well, perhaps, yeah, certainly one of the top 3 most important causes in the world today, because we do not have an equal platform or, you know, equal society, and just in terms of how we're treated as women. And, you know, we have lived in really patriarchal cultures, and we're still in those cultures even though we're fighting against it. So race and racism is something that is, you know, it's something you cannot avoid when you are a person of color living in a majority white society, because you are minoritized on account of the color of your skin. So you're considered a minority on account of the color of your skin. Now, in my case, I had a white mother and a Black father, but people saw the brownness. They didn't see the whiteness. So we also know that race is not a biological fact, right? It's a lived experience, but biologically, race does not exist. But we cannot ignore it because it is there in our societies. It's, you know, it governs so much about who you are as a person of color in majority white societies. So this is something that I have dealt with all my life, but actually the way in which I've dealt with it is, as an adult working in the arts, is through my arts. You know, through creating theatre by and for and about Black women, or writing the books that I've written, exploring all kinds of areas around the African diaspora. And not that all my books are about racism, but my books are about the African diaspora. That doesn't mean to say that race and racism are one and the same. So I'm not writing stories about racism, I'm writing Black stories. One of my novels, The Emperor's Babe, is set in Roman London nearly 2,000 years ago. It's about a Black girl growing up in Roman London nearly 2,000 years ago. This was about 1,500 years before anti-Black racism was even a thing, right? So what she experiences isn't racism. She experiences things because she's a female in that society. And also as an activist, I have been somebody who has been advocating and initiating projects for inclusion to make sure that the arts and literature in particular, latterly, are inclusive for everybody in our society, not just for, you know, just for narrow demographics. How do you negotiate racism? I move in quite, sometimes quite elite circles, and I've learned to negotiate those spaces, which I could never have negotiated when I was a younger woman, because I would have, I was very angry in my early 20s. I would have just stood up and shouted and stormed out. But then you learn that it is about having conversations, and it is about enrolling people in the possibility of change, and it's not about taking the moral high ground. So in Manifesto, in the book, I take responsibility for the whole of my life as an adult. I don't blame anybody for anything. I cannot stand victimhood. It's not there in my fiction, in my novels. It's not there in Manifesto. It's about taking responsibility and being an agent for change if you need to be or if you want to be, which is what I have chosen to be. But how you negotiate that space is, A, it's up to the individual to a certain extent, but then it's also a collective experience, and there are collective actions that you can take. And for me, it's always about enrolling people in the possibility of change rather than telling them they're wrong.
Wow, that is a beautiful takeaway to have. And I know that I have about one more question left for you that I can ask before I open it up to everybody else in the audience. And I guess I always love to end on lessons. If you could go back in time, what's that one thing you would tell yourself? And I'm 23 now, and I always look back. I mean, haven't lived that long, but I always look back on my time and I think, if I could be 15 again, what would I tell myself? And the one thing that I would tell myself is to believe in me. Like, if I had had the bravery and confidence and courage that I have now, then I can't imagine what I'd be doing now. I would be unstoppable. So if I could go back in time, that's what I would tell myself. And I would love to know if you could go back to being in this chair, back in your school again, what would you say to yourself?
Vee, I have to say, you are unstoppable. You're 23. You've had this incredible education, and you're publishing your first book soon. That's pretty unstoppable, right? I would tell myself that everything I go through is part of the experience of living and the experience of life, and to not regret it, and to just accept that this is part of who I am and who I will be, and that as a writer, everything I've gone through in my life is amazing research for the fiction and actually the plays that I've written. So it's about going with the flow, even when you feel terrible, even when there are times in your life when there are hardship, or when you fall in. I mean, I never get depressed, right? But I think I probably did, probably in my mid-teens, 15, 16, I remember being really, really kind of like quite stroppy, actually. But, just to go with everything that I go through, knowing that it's making me who I am, and that actually life is about facing obstacles. It is about going through the difficult times and coming out the other end. But you have to come out the other end, of course, which is, I know resilience is part of the school's motto. And you actually learn resilience through going through the difficult times, I would argue. I don't think you really become resilient if you're given an easy ride. If you're given an easy ride, then you don't develop those skills and those the inner metal that you need to survive for the rest of the life in a way that is rewarding for you. So so that's what I say to myself. And also I would say to myself that what I think now and how I feel now will change and grow over the decades.
Okay, and that was a beautiful way to end it. So if you're ever having moments of self-doubt, just remember that. Keep on going, be resilient, and to never give up, which I'm sure you will see and read when you grab your free copy, which is over there soon, and you'll see that theme throughout the book. And thank you so much, Bernardine. Now that's enough from me. It's time to hear from you guys. And I'm so excited to see who the first brave person to ask the question is. No one ever wants to be the first, but you got to be the first. And remember, don't ask yourself, what if I fail? Ask yourself, what if I fly? So who is it? Who's first? I see you. Hi, pretty. Hey, what's your name?
Olivia.
Hi, Olivia. What's your question?
I wanted to ask, when and why did you decide to write your first book?
Yeah, so my first book was a poetry collection published in 1994, but I'd been writing poetry for about 10 years, more than 10 years previously. And at some point, I realized I had enough poems for a book. So I spent my 20s writing, but I never thought I'd write a book. But then by the end of my 20s, I realized I had a book, that I had enough poems for a book. And then I sent it out, and eventually it got published. And then I consciously decided to be a writer when I was about 30, and then focused on writing my second book, Lara.
Thank you for your question, Olivia. Who's got the next one? I'm gonna try and like scan the room. I can't see everybody, so I'm gonna come over to this side over here.
Okay. You know, in your previous books, why do you tend not to use like much punctuation?
Yes, so really it's Girl, Woman, Other, where I use unorthodox punctuation. And that's the book that was published in 2019. And I call it a fusion fiction. And what I discovered with that book, and also the preceding book, Mr. Loverman, was that when I removed the full stop, it gave me a much more free-flowing writing experience. And I was able to put a lot more into the storytelling than if I was using traditional punctuation. So it was actually a device that I used in order to, in a way, liberate my imagination with that book. I mean, I do use traditional punctuation in most of my books, but not in that one. And I think it's also, because it's a free-flowing, it was a free-flowing writing experience, I think it's also a free-flowing reading experience. Because, as you will know, the full stop is there for a reason. It's to stop you. But actually, when you get rid of the full stop, the words just tumble on the page and they just go on and on and on and on. And hopefully, if you're enjoying it, that becomes quite an exhilarating reading experience. So I am an experimental writer in that I tend not to write traditional novels because that's just my thing. You know, I like to do things differently. And so the fusion fiction, A Girl, Woman, Other was part of that.
And we really appreciate that style of writing. It's been very enjoyable. And yes, I can see the hands going up. Hey, what's your name?
Hi, my name is Emily. My question is, compared to your first book and your most recent book, what is the process of publishing? Because you previously spoke about how you were rejected 20 times, but obviously now you're the winner of the Booker Prize. So how does it compare?
I've been with the same publisher about 20 years now. So for my first two books, I had two different publishers. They were very small, and I wasn't paid anything, actually, for those books. And then with my third book, I went with my current publisher, Penguin Random House, and suddenly I was treated very differently by the literature industry because I was with such a prestigious press. But I've been with him ever since. Simon Prosser is my editor. And so I haven't really had to kind of put my work out there with each book.
Wow, that's amazing. And we're thankful for him. Okay, we're going to go here to the middle. Oh, I can see lots of hands. Okay, I can see you right there in the middle. Both of you can go because you're doing it quite well. Right there.
Hello, my name is Honey, and my question is, how do you title your books?
How do you title your books?
Okay, you've got a really strong voice.
Yeah.
You should be doing acting or something. How do I title them? Yeah, I love creating titles for my books, and they are so important. I mean, look at yours, Vee. Empowered, that's the title, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? It says, it does what it says on the cover, right? So with fiction, sometimes a really direct title works. So with Girl, Woman, Other, I wanted it to be a book where when people saw it, they would want to buy it without knowing what it was about. So I could have gone with a very poetic title where people wouldn't know what it means necessarily, but I thought, no, I want a title that's going to help sell this book. And so that's why I called it Girl, Woman, Other. And then other titles come about in different ways. So I have a book called Blonde Roots, which was published in 2008. And I've created a world where Africans enslave Europeans, and it's a satire. It's comic as well as got tragic elements to it, because it's looking at slavery from a completely different perspective. And Blonde Roots is a play on the idea of the roots of your hair. So people don't normally have blonde roots because they dye their hair blonde. So usually the roots are dark or they're grey. So Blonde Roots is spinning that on its head, but it's also a play on the television series and the book Roots. Does anybody know that? Yeah. Oh, you do? Because that was from the 70s. And so Roots was sort of the first breakthrough novel about African Americans who've been enslaved. And so Blonde Roots, because my protagonist in Blonde Roots is a blonde woman, the Blonde Roots is a play on that. It's not just roots, it's blonde roots. So it's kind of like white roots. So yeah, they come about in different ways. My previous novel, Mr. Loverman, before Go Woman Other, is about a gay Caribbean man who is 74. And so Mr. Loverman is a reference to that.
Wow, that's really cool. And I remember there was a girl next to the one who just had it.
Why did you choose the title Manifesto for like this book?
Yeah, because a manifesto is usually, how do you describe it? It's like the intention usually of a political party. You know, like the Tories, the Conservative government have got a manifesto. The Labour Party will have a manifesto. But it's also a statement of intent about what you might do. So artists have manifestos. Not everybody, but in history, artists will create manifestos, which is saying, this is what I stand for, this is what I believe in, this is what I'm doing. So my book isn't really a manifesto, although there is a literal manifesto at the back, like a statement of intent, if you like, or a call to arms or an encouragement. But it is about what I'm about as a creative artist, looking at different areas of my life, such as my heritage and childhood, but also my relationships that I've had, and my living situations and so on. Also, manifesting is something that I've been doing for about 24 years, and that is where you visualize what you want in life. So manifesto is also a bit of a play on the idea of that.
Speaking it into existence, manifesting it, making it real, like writing down your goals, saying it out loud, making sure you're giving life to it, you're manifesting. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to this side. Oh, someone's got a cheerleading party over there. They're all pointing hands. Okay, right there. There we go.
Just like a simple question. How long does it take to write a book, or your book?
Okay, so there's my story, but then there's the story of other writers who write much faster than I do. Girl, Woman, Other took about over 5 years.
Wow.
My book, Soul Tourist, took 4 years. My book, Lara, took 5 years. But I did write a book called Hello Mum, which is a novella, so it's a short book, which took 3 weeks.
Oh.
Yeah. And some people say it's my best work, as if, like, thank you very much. It took 3 weeks, and you're saying it's my best work. So it can take a long time for me, but other writers write much faster than I do. So I know writers who will write a novel in 6 months, in 1 year, in 1.5 years. So I did an event. Do you know Dawn French?
Yeah.
So, you know, National Treasure. We did an event together at Cheltenham Festival a few weeks ago, and she said it takes her 9 months to draft, to produce the first draft of a novel, and then 3 months to revise it. So she's really fast, but I'm not.
Wow. I didn't know that's how, wow. That was really... Oh, I don't know where I'm going to go now. Over there? Where we've got the whole school pointing. You have to stand up, whoever that was. You got a round of applause and everything. Yes. Yeah. Okay, now I'm intrigued. Please tell me your name and why are they clapping?
My name is Agosa, and my question is, why did you decide to stop a career in drama and acting and move on to writing?
Yeah.
I can see why they were clapping. That's a good question.
Yeah. The reason was that I was running a theatre company, as I mentioned, Theatre of Black Women, and it was a 24/7 job, and you know it was just incredibly demanding. And I discovered quite early on that I lost my love of acting. So I had loved acting up until I went to drama school. I had a great time at drama school, but somehow I lost my innocence in terms of performing, because when you go to drama school, you then consciously learn to develop your performance skills. Whereas at the youth theatre, it was just fun. Do you know what I mean? You didn't have to interrogate yourself the way that you do as an actor in a drama school, because it's intensely personal, and also you can become quite self-conscious. And when I left drama school, as much as I loved drama school, and I started acting, I just didn't feel so natural to me. And so at a certain point, I just realized I didn't want to do it anymore. I just didn't want to do it anymore, so I stopped. And that was in 1986. And then when my first book was published in 1994, and then I realized I had to do public events, because I hadn't thought about that. But I had had about 8 years where I hadn't done any public work at all. And I had to then reacquaint myself with public speaking and putting my work out there. And I think I had a bit of stage fright, actually. Having been, an actor and, very at ease with performance, then I got to the stage where having to do this kind of thing, I was kind of nervous about it. Not anymore, but I was then. So yeah, so that's the reason I fell out of love with it.
How did you overcome, sorry guys, I'm going to take a question here. How did you overcome the nerves and the fear of deciding I no longer enjoy this and I'm going to stop? Because I think a lot of the times when we say I want to be a doctor and you go to school to study medicine, you feel like, well, that's it, now I have to be a doctor. I've told everybody I'm going to be a doctor, I've got to be a doctor. How did you get that, number one, the bravery, but also overcome that fear and the nerves you're talking about of leaving something you know?
It's interesting because I didn't see it as brave. I just saw it as, yeah, I'm not doing it anymore. I didn't feel a sense of loss. I did feel a sense of I don't know what to do next, which is when I focused on the writing eventually, because I realized, well, what do I want to do? What do I love? Oh, I love writing. That's the thing that I returned to again and again. So that made the decision, didn't make the decision for me. I made the decision that I would then focus on writing. And I wasn't anxious or nervous about giving up the performing aspect. I guess it really had run its course for me, and I never wanted to go back to it either. I've never felt that I need to get back on stage. I have a friend who's an actor, and she says to me, she said it for years, whenever she's in a play and someone else is on stage, she wants to jump onto the stage and elbow them off so that she has all the attention. And I'm like, whoa, but I never felt that. But then as a writer, you do all this public work, which I've been doing now for nearly 30 years. So that there is a performative element to that.
Wow, that is really, really incredible to hear. And I'm conscious of our time, so we are going to take 2 more questions. And I'm going to have to go to this side for now, and then I'll be back over there, okay? So anyone from here? Well, you stood right up, so you might as well take it. What's your name?
Hi, my name is Alliance.
Alliance. Nice to meet you, Alliance. What's your question for Bernardine?
Okay, so earlier you talked about being unstoppable to overcome your fears. What would you define as unstoppable, and what often came in your way, whether tangible or not?
Yeah, so unstoppability means that you're going for something and there are obstacles put in your way. I have had many obstacles in my life, but as I said, I don't like to dwell on them because I don't want to present myself in any way as a victim. But I was in a relationship, for example, for 5 years with somebody who, by the end of it, I had to leave. I would have stopped writing because it was such a toxic relationship. So that was one instance of an obstacle that I had to overcome. But when I overcame that relationship, I never looked back, and I would never go into that kind of relationship. I would never go back into that kind of relationship, and I would see the warning signs straight away, because I didn't see the warning signs, and it was what you would now call a coercively controlling relationship. Right? But we didn't have that vocabulary then. So this person was very charming and seductive, and before I knew it, I was losing myself, I was losing my voice, and eventually I was losing my creativity. And I had to leave the relationship, and then I had to recover, and that took years to recover. But it will never happen again. So I then became unstoppable in that sense, right? Because that was a sort of trap that I fell into, and then I left it. But also, just to the other side to that is because, the other side to that is that everything is complex, everything is complicated. It's not I don't see life in black and white, right or wrong. I was complicit in that relationship as well because I stayed in it and I didn't need to. Now, some people say, yeah, but you were being psychologically abused. Well, yes, I was. But I could have left and I didn't. I didn't have children. I was free. I was free to go, but I didn't go. So that is the other side to that kind of dynamic, that I also took responsibility for the part I played in that relationship, also in the book. If you turn to the men and women who came and went, that's where you'll find all that stuff.
Wow, well, that tells me we all need to grab our free coffee today. The final question has to go this way. I'm sorry, everybody. It has to. Okay, I think, yes, I see you right there. Right there. Sorry, the lights, I can't see properly. What's your name?
My name's Asaru McKen.
Woo! And what's your question?
My question links to a book that we're studying in A-level right now called The Help. I want to know your opinion, because I think it'll be interesting, is what's your idea on cultural capital, and do you think there should be more focus in implementing it?
Yeah, somebody asked me about that earlier, actually, about The Help, and I think it's a problematic book. I don't believe in the concept of cultural appropriation because I don't know who owns culture, although I understand that it's also very complicated, and that there are socio-political contexts and also consequences to how we explore culture in the arts from whatever perspective we explore it from. But The Help is a book which I think somebody has, admittedly, she hasn't hid the fact, the author has taken her maid's story and turned it into a novel that then became, her family's maid's story, turned it into a novel that then became a bestseller and was marketed by the publishers in such a way that it rose to the top of the pile, but also because she was what was considered to be very marketable because of how she looks as a white blonde woman writing this African-American sort of, I keep wanting to say slave, but African-American maid story. And then the way in which that story is delivered by the writer is also problematic. And I know there was a lot of controversy about it when it was published in America. So yeah, I think it's a problematic book, but at the same time, we develop our critical faculties when we are presented with material through which we can explore ideas and explore ideas and offer our own interpretation on them. And sometimes when a book is problematic, it's easier to do that than when it's a book that you just love. If you just love a book, it's very hard to write, I don't know how long your essays are, but it's very hard to write an essay about it other than saying that you love it. But when there are problems with a text, that's when it can get really meaty and where you can develop your critical faculties.
Wow. What a way to end, right? Wow. Can I just say that was amazing, and I'm grateful for the way that you answered all of our questions with just directness. There was no flowering or hiding. You were just direct, unapologetic, and I really, really appreciate that. And I know all of you do. So let's give her one last round of applause to say thank you.